Good evening, everyone. Many thanks for everyone joining in this event tonight with the Kent Archaeological Society. The Kent Archaeological Society has existed since 1858 and has an illustrious history in telling about the archaeology and history of the ancient county of Kent. We are involved in education, in the publication of the journal Archaeological Kantiana, and also in being able to assist in funding projects, different projects with different parts of the endowments we've been given over the years. The Kent Archaeological Society has over 650 members and some institutional members, and we're one of the longest established and best known of all of the similar local archaeological societies in Britain, and we must be one of the most well established globally. This is a series of events that we're doing for our members, especially during a time like this when it is more difficult to get to public events. We are therefore reaching out to our current members, but also wider public, and in particular to our student membership initiative we just started, younger members who are engaged in the kind of interests that we have as a society. Tonight we're going to be talking about a particularly important but also contentious issue, and that was the Caesarean arrivals in Britain 5 BC. These have been a matter of enormous controversy since the time when they were first discussed in the Kent Archaeological Society, Archaeological Kantiana, in, I believe, 1858. So almost as soon as we were established, there was discussion about where did Caesar actually land. There have been a number of contenders for the places where he landed on his two separate visits. But I thought before we would talk to Richard Taylor tonight about the involvement he had with the excavations in 2017, we might want to give ourselves some context by looking at the particular source for the information about these arrivals, and that is by Caesar himself in the War in Gaul. In Book 4 of that account, there's a reference to the place in which he landed. It says, the nature of this place was this. The sea was confined by mountains so close to it that a dart could be thrown from their summit upon the shore. Considering this by no means a fit place for disembarking, Caesar remained at anchor till the 9th hour for the other ships to arrive there. And then he said that they brought their ships to a place against an open and level shore. And also mentions the size of the ships being so great that they could only be stationed in deep water. Then the soldiers be placed, unknown to them, with their hands embarrassed, oppressed with a large and heavy weight of armour coming onto the shore. Richard Taylor has been an archaeologist in Kent for a number of years. He is a BBC television presenter. He's also a trustee of the Kent Archaeological Society and the director of Darnley Archaeological Services. And so it's a great pleasure tonight to have him to give his account of the excavations, whether it does actually answer the question of, is this the place where Caesar arrived? So I suppose my first question is, what are the kind of archaeological evidence for Caesar's arrival in Britain and his presence here?
I'm pleased that Kerry actually mentioned that this was first discovered or it's first discussed in the KAS's Archaeological Kantiana, the first ever edition in 1858, and people are still discussing and arguing it to this day. So it's a really good topic to start off with. So I guess the first question is, what did we know about the Cesarean visits to Britain from documentary sources, Kerry? Yeah. Well, I guess from my reading, there are a number of sources, not least Caesar's own writings, I suppose. And looking at these, I think the key points to consider for me were in 55 BC, he comes to Britain with, we think, 2 legions, about 6,000 men, and he's here for about 5 weeks. In 54 BC, he comes over with 5 legions, which is approximately 15,000 men, and that also includes 2,000 cavalry and 800 vessels. And he's here for about 14 weeks. The first thing that strikes me about 54 BC is that you're going to need somewhere quite expansive to park all this gear. Now, on both occasions, Caesar looked for a suitable area along the East Kent coast to disembark. And a key bit of text, I think, for the 54 BC landings is that Caesar describes how he was faced by steep cliffs, which we've always presumed was Dover. And he sailed on for about 7 Roman miles before he landed his vessels. So that's the technicalities, if you like. The other thing I think we need to consider from Caesar's own writings is why Caesar came to Britain. And I think that's really interesting. And if you think about Caesar's character, the visit to Britain, I think, undoubtedly embellished his own reputation at home. I think Caesar was the sort of person who understood celebrity, what it meant, to inflate his own image, venturing into the unknown land on the edge of the known world. This would not be lost on Caesar. And this was all done, I guess, under the sort of strategic pretext that Britain was actually assisting Caesar's enemies in Gaul. So I think a combination of all that gives us a nice picture of, kind of sets the scene, if you like, for why Caesar actually came to Britain. How does that sound, Kerry?
Sounds good. So, I mean, in terms of the actual, kind of evidence of him ever actually being here, what does the archaeological record show? I mean, presumably when you were undertaking this dig, and I presume the dig was sort of consciously to look for this evidence.
Yeah.
What were you looking for, and what did you find?
Well, first of all, the archaeological record, in terms of its number, there's very, very little. In fact, I think the only artifact, to my knowledge, is the Caesarean era helmet that was found at a bridge near Canterbury, which is exhibited in the Canterbury Museum. So this is the only piece of direct evidence we have for Caesar's visits. So the sort of things that we'd be looking for during the course of the excavations, I suppose it would concentrate on militaria, really. Iron weapons, hobnails, that sort of thing. So that's what we were looking for in particular. So the archaeological record is actually very slim. So we're going into this, much like Caesar did, rather into the unknown.
I mean, so to the sort of really kind of, I suppose, the most contentious issue, and the one that, I guess the sort of dig in 2017 was meant to address.
Yeah.
Kind of where are the likely candidates? As you say, it seems that there's sort of a very narrow group of, places. And I think someone emailed us when they saw the, advertisement for this event and said that there were digs, I think in Walmer, in, I think the 1960s, where they uncovered a Roman burial ground. And this was because, Roman centurions were often sort of buried near the place where they had a battle or kind of landed, and, it was a meaningful place. So this was a candidate, but there's obviously been quite a few different candidates. So could you sort of go through the list of the most likely and sort of maybe go through the pros and cons of them?
Yeah, there's been a lot of potential or sites purported throughout the years, not just in Kent, by the way, but we'll stay with the ones in Kent for now. there are numerous locations along the Kent coast that have been argued as Caesar's landing sites, but nobody actually knows for sure whether they were true or if it was indeed the landing sites. The one work or piece of work that I've looked at was the book Ancient Britain by Thomas Rice Holmes, and he makes quite a number of good cases, I think. For the 55 BC visit, he suggests between Walmer and Deal, and I think this is probably correct, actually, if you look at the documentary sources. For 54 BC, he talks about a site between Deal and Sandwich, which I'm slightly less sure about. And we also have to remember that when he wrote his work, there was actually very little evidence for archaeology and coastal landscape change at the time. And 100 years later, things have moved on and things have changed. So I sort of lean towards this idea of 54 BC being between Deal and perhaps Sandwich slightly more north, which is what led us to Pegwell Bay ultimately.
And Pegwell Bay, so Pegwell Bay is the kind of place that was talked about in very excited BBC and other news reports in 2017 as the place where Caesar landed. So it's a pretty sort of emphatic statement, and you know, it seems that this sort of mystery has been solved. You were obviously very involved in that excavation. So was this the sort of final solution to this problem, that finally, you know, we now know where the sort of great future emperor of you know, the Roman Empire sort of landed, and this, we can actually say that this is definitely the place?
Possibly. Is the political answer to this. I think the best way round this, and people can make their own conclusions at the end, is to tell you the story of excavations at Pegwell Bay. So the story begins in 2010 during excavations for the East Kent Access Road in Thanet, between Manston and Port Richborough, where incidentally there were many exciting archaeological discoveries from prehistoric right up to medieval. So this is a picture, and the course here is where the current road now is. And this area here was where excavations took place. Now, amongst the discoveries that were made here, Professor Andrew Fitzpatrick was interested in a large 1st century BC ditch that was located here, where this red circle is, and also over here, where that red line is. Now, this is near Ebbsfleet Farm on the Ebbsfleet Peninsula, just south of Manston. So why was he interested in this then? And what could he see? Well, Andrew was particularly interested in this ditch, which was 5 meters wide and 2 meters deep. And it had walls sloping at about 45 degrees, suggesting that it is actually defensive. And it was exposed, this ditch, in places 500 meters apart. And it's on a very low-lying peninsula that's less than a kilometre from high ground. Now, the East Kent Access Road excavations also revealed an Iron Age village that lay within the circuit of this ditch. And what's interesting about this village is it seems to have gone out of use around 50 BC. Now that's a very interesting point. Also, Andrew noticed that this ditch was very similar in size and shape to Caesarean defensive works that were found at Alesia in France, dating from about 52 BC. And in addition to this, Andrew argues that the location of Pegwell Bay matches much of Caesar's own accounts. So, the key points here: the location matches Caesar's own accounts. From these excavations, we've got this large defensive ditch. The ditch surrounds an Iron Age village. That village, and the activity of that village, stops around 50 BC all of a sudden. And the ditch itself is very similar to other Caesarean works on the continent. So the question is, was this ditch that we have at Ebbsfleet a similar Caesarean fort defensive that we found elsewhere? So this was quite exciting. And I guess there's three problems with this idea. The first is, for over a century, it's been thought that Caesar landed at Deal, or in the region of Deal, about 15 kilometers to the south. Also, in the Iron Age, Thanet was considered, or it was an island separated from the rest of Kent by the Wantsum Channel. So it was an island, a self-contained island. And thirdly, there's no evidence for Julius Caesar's camps ever being found anywhere in Britain. So once the East Kent Access Road excavations finished, and as part of the Footsteps of Caesar project, a partnership between Kent County Council, University of Leicester, which was funded by the Leverhulme Trust and led by Andrew Fitzpatrick, it was decided that a 3-year community archaeology project would investigate this ditch and the area around it to see if it was in fact part of Caesar's landing sites in 54 BC. So in order to carry this out, KCC community archaeologist Andrew Mayfield and myself led groups of volunteers from across the county to excavate and investigate this ditch. So work started in 2015 with a geophysical survey, and in 2016 and 17 with actual excavations. So we've got a big project ahead over 3 years. We've got plenty of time, and our goal was to prove or find evidence of Caesar actually being at Ebbsfleet. We okay to go on?
Yeah, just very quickly on that map that you've just shown.
Yes.
Obviously today, I mean, that's all continuous coastline, isn't it? So really, yes. The sort of, and then the sort of, you know, the kind of river snakes around that.
Yeah.
So could you sort of just say what it must have sort of looked like 2,000 years ago as you came? I mean, you would basically be looking really at a very wide kind of channel entry, and then an island and the mainland. I mean, that would all be pretty obvious, I presume.
Yeah, I think the Wantsum Channel, it wasn't so much like a flowing river. I think it was probably more mud flats with perhaps a navigable river, very small river going up it through the course of it.
Right.
So it wouldn't be this vast sort of estuary or anything like that. It's quite a tame sort of mud flats with a tidal river going through the middle of it.
The kind of vessels that Caesar was using, I mean, obviously in the source that I mentioned right at the beginning, that it mentions they were pretty substantial. So I presume they wouldn't have been able to get in very far.
I wouldn't have thought so, no. And this, I suppose, is related to the question, why would you land on Thanet? Well, I don't think crossing the Wantsum Channel will be too much of an issue for the Roman military. If it wasn't an issue for the locals. I'm sure the locals of Thanet, the local Iron Age tribes or whatever, would quite easily get to the Kent mainland. So I'm pretty sure the Roman engineers would easily field the Wantsum Channel, no problem. So I personally don't see a problem logistically and militarily with landing on Thanet and crossing the Wantsum.
Just one final little thing on this. There's a reference to storms, destroying some of the vessels. I mean, a very bad storm. I think that was one of the, can't remember if it was the first or the second landing. So no evidence has ever been found of, Roman period boats sort of buried deep in the kind of silt or stuff like that. That's never been discovered.
No, nothing's been found of that nature. But what's particularly interesting about the Ebbsfleet Peninsula here is it would have been a perfect ground to repair ships, if you like, because you're close to the channel, just over Pegwell Bay, and you can land ships there, no problem. Whereas up here, you've got more. The land is raised. It's cliffs, where this is very low lying. So it'd be absolutely perfect for mooring ships or repairing them.
And just for reference, where is Richborough? Today's sort of Richborough remains. Are they whereabouts would they be on the map?
That's further south.
That would be south. Okay, right. Great. So the actual excavations, if you could say a bit about the challenges of the excavations, because at the beginning, obviously, you said you can't really sort of be definitive. So there must have been quite a few challenges in this kind of dig. And what were the key questions that it answered? And what are the key questions that it left unresolved? And maybe, what are the things that you could do that might be able to address that in the future, people that want to, continue to address this question?
Okay, right. So in 2015, as part of the community project, that was devoted to a geophysical survey. So where the actual road was, the East Kent Access Road, land adjacent to that, we got permission from the local farmer to conduct our excavations and surveys in that. And this is where we believed that the ditch that Andrew found continued into. So our first job was to try and locate that ditch using a geophysical survey. And this is what we found. So we've got a lovely picture here. This is a very sizable field. It was about 20 hectares. And here is where the road actually goes. And just up here was where Andrew viewed the ditch. And you can see over here, this is a magnetometry map of the agricultural field. And we found that the ditch continued on this red line all the way down. There's a nice little gap there, which we thought could be an entrance, and another potential entranceway there. And then it continues round here. And this ditch, we believe, actually is it contains an Iron Age village, which you can see here from the vast amount of magnetic disturbance, which is classic of any sort of occupation. So in 2015, we managed to identify some potential targets for excavation, which was this gap here and this gap there. So with that done in 2015, 2016, we actually got to excavate. So in 2016, we excavated 2 large trenches, which were here and here. And if we look at this, you can see the picture on the right, we've actually got the course of the ditch going north-south. And one of the key finds we had was a tip of a Roman pilum on the left there, which was actually found in the lower fills of this large ditch over here. And this particular pilum has been identified as more than likely Caesarean. So that's good artifact evidence. We've got what looks like genuine Caesarean weaponry found within the fill of this large ditch. In 2017, we sort of upped the ante and excavated the other large entranceway in more detail. And what we were looking at was an actual road surface, if you like, which is this here. So what we're looking at here is the ditch itself is going that way, and this here is an entranceway with a metalled surface for a road into the Iron Age enclosure. Now this was fascinating because we were thinking, you know, if it's a roadway, it's going to have lots of footfall. Possibly soldiers could have walked up there, things get dropped on it, etc. So it's usually a treasure trove for artifactual evidence. So I don't know if you can see, but on that picture, you can actually see bones. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right, so this surface, this road surface, was crammed full of finds. And we had several iron objects off the surface. They were badly corroded. We couldn't identify them straight away, but they included a probable sword and at least 2 spearheads. The spearheads were potentially Caesarean. This particular sword was definitely Iron Age. So we're looking at sort of, 200 to 50 BC. In addition, on the surface of this road, there were lots of human bones also found on the surface. Now, these came from at least 2 people, and they included thigh bones, arm bones, and actual fragments of skull. And this is one of the skulls actually being very carefully removed. The interesting things about these bones is that they had cut marks made by weapons. So these people obviously died a violent death. We don't know how that happened, but we know that it did, and their remains were pressed into this road surface. So we've got evidence so far of human remains, we've got ironwork, and we've got lots of footfall from the actual surface. We also had a look inside the ditch itself. And one of the things we found whilst excavating the ditch was lots of Iron Age pottery, and at the base of one of the ditch terminus, we found a cattle skull which looks like it's been placed at the bottom. Now, this is a common prehistoric practice, indicating perhaps that this ditch, the large ditch that we found, was originally of Iron Age date. So in other words, pre-Caesarean. And added to this, we also found quite a lot of mid to late Iron Age pottery within this ditch. So it's sort of suggesting that this large ditch that we've seen was perhaps originally Iron Age. Mm. What we had to think about was, if this ditch is containing Iron Age artifacts and Caesarean artifacts, was it actually recut or adapted by Caesar's troops if they landed in 54 BC? So that's a big consideration. So that's some of the evidence to consider, to look at when we excavated just small areas of this field. So I guess this is it was a very successful community excavation, lots of engagement. And if you think strategically, Pegwell Bay would be an ideal place to land 15,000 men, 2,000 cavalry, and 800 vessels. The Ebbsfleet Peninsula, as we've already discussed, was probably an ideal site to station or repair vessels. The geophysics actually confirmed the presence of a defensive ditch, and we've got probable Caesarean weaponry recovered from that ditch, as well as Iron Age material. And we've got a vibrant Iron Age village which ended abruptly in about 50 BC, but we can't say why. So our search for all this evidence, I suppose the biggest challenge was that we were looking for evidence of a single event. You know, it's like looking through a keyhole at a slither of time. So that in itself, it is quite difficult to tie down. And I suppose also that Caesar's clues and the remains discovered at Ebbsfleet suggest the site may well have been a fort to protect and to repair his fleet. The other things we've got to consider are that parts of the ditch appear to be Iron Age, so they almost certainly date from 350 to 200 BC, most definitely. So this ditch may actually be earlier than Caesarean. So we need further work, if you like, to examine whether Caesar actually adapted this ditch. It certainly looks like it. So there's an awful lot to consider there, I think. And I guess the big question is that enough to say Caesar was there? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
So you have right at the beginning said possibly, and what you've got here seems to be quite a lot of evidence. I mean, quite a strong argument that this must be, you know, kind of a very strong contender. Is there anything that makes you think this, you know, kind of maybe isn't the place? That there may be another place or another kind of aspect that, you know, that the sort of dig may have missed, and that's what makes you kind of just a little bit hesitant to completely endorse this option?
Well, I think the most important thing is to say that more evidence is required, I think. Further excavation of other locations within the site to look for additional evidence. I don't think the evidence we've got at the minute is enough to say categorically Caesar was there. I'd like to see more evidence, perhaps, of boat repair. If you're looking at military life, you're looking at accommodation, you're looking at latrine pits, tent pegs, hobnails, all the things you associate with the Roman military. A helmet would be great. And also we need to definitely look at whether Caesar adapted or recut this large Iron Age defensive ditch. It looks like it was already there, at least in part. So have Roman troops adapted this to suit their own means? So I think this site has lots of potential. I think it has a lot to offer in terms of archaeology and the secrets it still has, both Caesarean and of course Iron Age. There is a huge Iron Age village here that was very vibrant and had evidence of trade with the Mediterranean back to 200 to 300 BC. A fantastic place. So it would make sense if I was coming over the channel with 15,000 men to locate there. So I think there's lots of potential for this site, and really we would like to go back and excavate other areas to find this additional evidence.
Is that possible? Do you think that that will be happening in the future?
I sincerely hope so. I know that the landowner is quietly keen to do so. And I think the other important point to mention is the vast majority of the work done here from 2015 to 2017 was done by volunteers. And I can't tell you how important community engagement through archaeology is, even for more high-profile projects like this. So I think that the potential to go back to this site and engage people is enormous.
So just in the final few questions, if anyone does have particular questions that they would like to ask Richard, then please feel free to put it in the chat function, and I can read it out. So there's a chat function at the bottom of your screens. It's just where you kind of have the mute and the video and everything. There's a chat function. So if there is a question, then do please ask it, because Richard is here to be quizzed on this. One thing that I was thinking as you were speaking was, I mean, both of these visits were very short, right? I mean, they weren't more than, I think, a couple of months, I think, in the time that we're thinking about. So, I mean, it's a sort of little bit curious that, there must be many, many, many events in the whole of the last 2,000 years where there were, kind of 2 months of visits, kind of maybe by other invaders and what have you. So, do you think when you were doing the excavation or kind of people in the past when they were doing excavation, that because this particular kind of visit was so high profile that people were just desperately looking for things, and they found what they were looking for?
I think subconsciously that always happens, whatever excavation you're on. You want to find what it is you're looking for. So when you're doing it, you've got to try and be as objective as possible. I would love to stand here and say, this is where Caesar definitely landed, but the archaeologist in me says, look, you've got to look at the evidence and how do you interpret that? What does it tell you? And it's very difficult, especially when you're looking at the archaeology of short events. You know, if you're looking at the archaeology of occupation of a place for hundreds of years, it's much easier. But these very short events, I think it's very difficult to actually pin them down.
So we've got some questions. I'll just actually, unless you want to refer to the PowerPoint again, shall I just bring it onto the full screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions now, you'll be pleased to know. They're coming in thick and fast. So the first from Amanda Thomas is, has any additional analysis been done on the bones that were discovered on the Iron Age road that you just showed, I think in slide 9 or 10?
Yes, they are currently being radiocarbon dated. The initial results show dates of about 100 BC to, well, about around 100 BC plus or minus 50 years or so. But those results are still to be confirmed.
Okay, and then this is from Jessica Butt. Is there any evidence that the Romans may have been welcomed at Thanet and were fighting externally with the assistance of the locals? I mean, I think in the sort of Caesar's the Gallic War, he does sort of mention that at one of the arrivals they couldn't see anyone. There was no one around. Maybe it was lunchtime. But is there any evidence that they were welcomed?
I think there's perhaps more evidence or suggestive evidence for the Claudian invasion of AD 43, perhaps. The British were definitely aware of the Roman presence, I think. They were aware of Roman potential. They were aware of Roman trade. So it wasn't like the Romans and Caesar were complete aliens. I think there's probably much more interaction than what we probably think, especially through trade. Whether or not they were welcomed, it's a possibility, because there's no genuine evidence for any large-scale battles. I mean, if you're coming to another land with 15,000 men, you'd think you were coming for a bit of a tear-up, but there's no categoric evidence of anything like that happening on a large scale. So,
because the battles that did, sorry.
No, go on, Kerry.
I mean, the battles that did happen were afterwards, weren't they? I mean, the battle at possibly Big Brew Fort near Canterbury, or I think there was maybe a conflict near the Medway. I mean, or over the Medway. I mean, those happened after leaving the landing place.
And they're more likely to be, you know, large-scale skirmishes rather than huge battles. I think perhaps we're talking more what we would consider to be guerrilla warfare almost.
There's just a point here, I suppose. When talking about the Wonsum Channel and the boat repair, it's worth noting that the tidal range of the Wonsum was between 3.5 and 5 meters. So the high and low water navigation would be quite different. And boats could be brought in at high water, then allowed to settle. So I suppose that's, I mean, that's sort of worth remembering. This is from Richard New. How does the potential fortified area fit onto the 1st century BC Ebbsfleet Peninsula? It looks too narrow for it to fit, and surely if it was a peninsula, it would not have needed a north-south ditch, just a ditch across the top of the peninsula.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. From what we can gather from the projections of the ditch, it literally just fits onto that peninsula. And it does raise the question, if it was built in the Iron Age, why would you need such a big defensive ditch? I mean, you can understand later on why Caesar would perhaps, you know, adapt that ditch to make it more defensible. But it is very curious that you've got this low-lying peninsula that's quite narrow, and you've got this great big defensive ditch plonked in the middle of it. So that's a very good question, and that's something really we could only answer with further archaeological investigations. The other problem on the eastern side, the ditch is now under a golf course, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't get up the 13th fairway.
Right, so there could be the sort of final clue for this. So this is from Christopher, just thanking you for a useful update. And then he said, you emphasised the scale of the existing native settlement. I think that was on the 9th or the 10th slide. Yep. Could not the defences be a response to Caesar thrown up against his arrival further south on the coast? So, I mean, they were kind of put, there in response to his arrival elsewhere.
Possibly, yeah. Particularly if you take into account that Caesar was there in 55 BC, the local Iron Age tribes might have thought, well, if this has happened, Caesar's gone, but he's coming back, we need some sort of defense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point, and one I would look to answer if we ever went back there to excavate.
Yeah. Because historically it was always sort of people talking about the Deal, the Deal Beach, that's where they arrived. And I guess it's a difficult thing to give up, isn't it? Because when you look out to sort of English Channel, you think of that place as being the place where this happened. But so there's a question from Rosebery Hub. If the Wonsum Channel was mudflats with a narrow river, why was the Ebbsfleet Peninsula a good place to moor ships? And where could the rest of the vast fleet moor?
Well, I guess that's more to do with the fact that the eastern side, looking out across Pegwell Bay, is, if you're looking towards the channel, it's just convenient as a place to moor ships up, because it is the peninsula itself. It's a nice spit of land. It would function perfectly as somewhere to moor ships, because you've got the channel just there in front of you, and of course you've got the added bonus, if you like, that those ships could also, or vessels of a certain size, could go through to Wonsum and moor on the other side, I suppose. Just thinking aloud. So because it's a spit, you've actually got room either side of the peninsula to actually moor ships.
Yeah, so almost like a natural port, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like this is from Andrew Appleby. We talked about the Walmer possibility earlier and the excavations done there in the past. And he says, I think a mechanical digger trench in the field directly below Walmer Castle would show whether Caesar landed there or not. I did hear of a vast pit of human bones just above there, and a high status horse burial with human bones, and Latane bronze with a French handled beaker. So is that something that factored into your thinking, or have you heard of that? And do you think that that's sort of worth considering?
I hadn't been aware of that, no, but that itself is interesting. Yeah, I mean, you'd really want to radiocarbon date the bones in there to gauge a more exact time of death for the conflict.
And then this is from Gordon. Was there any recut of the ditch which not only expanded and deepened the ditch profile, or was there a realignment of the ditch, the sort of big defensive ditch? I appreciate there has only been a small amount of the ditch that has been sectioned, but has there any kind of evidence of a recut and kind of expansion?
Well, he's hit the nail on the head himself there. We only looked at a small section, and we couldn't see any evidence within that section of a recut. But bear in mind, we were close to the entrance, so were we to go elsewhere, we'd certainly look to find recuts into that ditch. Yes, they will be crucial.
And then this is Elizabeth Banning, one of our trustees. Aside from the spearhead, what material evidence was there for a Roman presence? If there was, where the ships were being repaired, you would expect some evidence for daily life and activities such as smithing, even if the military were only there for a few months. Or is truncation the answer? I think the later presence of the Saxon shore forts at either end of the Wantsum Channel suggests that the channel was navigable. So apart from the spearhead, yeah, what sort of other evidence was there for a sort of daily Roman life there?
Nothing that we could categorically say was Caesarean. And this is one of the things that we would need to do, is go back and look for exactly those. We think that or in fact, we know that the site was occupied at a much later time after the Claudian invasion. So there's lots of evidence actually of mid to late Roman activity. It's there in abundance. But we're actually looking for things that are deeper. And the sort of things that we found that were mid to late Roman, we just didn't find for the Caesarean period. But of course, it comes back to that argument of, if it was occupied for 200 to 300 years after the Claudian invasion, it was literally only occupied for weeks during Caesar's campaign. So it's that whole argument of a slither in time is what you're looking for. But Elizabeth's absolutely right. We need to find further evidence of daily life to be sure.
This is from Nick Watts. Taking into consideration the pottery report by the late Nigel Macpherson Grant, how do you explain the large quantity of mid and late Iron Age pottery from 150 to 7550 BC in the lower fills of the Caesarean ditch?
That's a very good point. If it's in the lower fills of the ditch, then it can't be Caesarean at that point. It would have to be recut elsewhere. And he's absolutely right. I personally think that the ditch was more likely to be of that Iron Age date, and we just need to find evidence if it was recut elsewhere to prove any Caesarean presence.
So maybe just a couple more questions. This is again from Andrew Appleby. It's a hypothesis. I think that if Caesar wanted to make a fortification on the site you investigated, he would have made his own pattern of fort and ignored the local works, presumably meaning that you'd have a slightly different kind of findings. Do you think that sort of argues against this site?
Kind of. My argument to that would be, well, why reinvent the wheel? If there's already a defensive structure there that you can adapt to utilize, why not? The problem with that is if you look at how the Romans move across the country, you have marching camps and things like that. The difference with this is it's more of a it's a stationary base. It's there to serve a purpose, we think, of repairing the fleet. So yeah, I can kind of see where he's coming from, but it's the reason why that peninsula is actually being used for boat repair.
Then my own final question, I suppose, a somewhat sort of naive one. What is the relationship between these and then the final conquest of Britain, the sort of Claudian, or the Claudian invasions from like 100 years, approximately 100 years later? I mean, presumably the archaeological evidence for that is much, much stronger, or is that not the case?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last bit, Kerry.
Or is that not the case? I mean, I'm presuming that the archaeological evidence for the 44 AD invasion and conquest was much stronger, but perhaps not.
No, the evidence for the Claudian invasion is much more forthcoming. This is the problem with the Cesarean visits, and it's the problem why there is no or very little artifactual evidence. It's just such an enigma, and it really is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Which I think is why we got so excited about the Pegwell Bay, because it was suggesting that Caesar might have been there. But I think, you know, in conclusion, to confirm that Caesar was there, more evidence is required, both artifactually for everyday life and a real examination of the ditches to see if they are actually recut in Caesarean times.
Are you optimistic that we'll find that?
I suppose fieldwork archaeologists are naturally pessimistic until they do actually find something. I would like to think so. I would certainly like to try. And I think the site itself, because it's such a fascinating site, it deserves it. That there is so much more to find there. And if we don't find evidence of Caesar, what we have, or what we would have found, is some spectacular Iron Age evidence, which is important in itself.
Final question from Jessica Butt again. Does the quantity of bone in the road surface mean it rapidly went out of use?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Kerry.
Sorry. Does the quantity of bone in the road surface mean it rapidly went out of use?
Yes, I think so. Because that actual road surface itself, I don't think it was exposed that long after those events, because there was silting over the top of it, which pretty much sealed those bones. So they were in very good shape. They were quite fresh. So yes, I think that particular surface went out of use very quickly after those events.
And I guess the final question is, why does it matter? Why does this particular sort of event matter so much? Because it's like, you know, he didn't conquer Britain, that happened later. So why do you think this has fascinated people? As you say, you know, the Archaeological Cantiana has had articles on this since, you know, the 1850s. So what is the kind of fascination with this particular, you know, couple of events?
I think there's two reasons. One is the mystery element to it, and two is the fact that it is about Caesar. I mean, we're talking about one of the most famous people that ever lived, and he came to this country twice, and he only went back because of the awful weather. The problem is we don't know where, so it makes sense to our nature, I suppose, to actually find out where he landed and what he did whilst he was here. But I think it's more about the cult of personality more than anything.
Yeah. So now I just got a message from Andrew Mayfield, who was also involved in the project. As you says, so unfortunately he just actually managed to get in. But I'm going to ask Andrew if it's okay, Andrew, if I'm going to ask to unmute you, and if you would like to maybe say a bit about the project. Is that okay? So I think, Andrew, I'm going to ask him to unmute if he can.
Hello.
Hello, Andrew. Hi, hello. Yeah, sorry. So I believe you've been patiently waiting to get in. I really do apologise. We had a limit of 100, which I wasn't aware of. But yeah, so Andrew, I mean, what Richard's been talking about is just how the excavation went, what it discovered, and how it was producing evidence, did produce evidence that is a bit sort of ambiguous. So what was your sort of kind of view of this excavation? What did it prove for you?
Well, I think, I mean, most importantly, it was a fantastic opportunity for the community to get involved in a sort of research excavation. You know, on the back of all the work of the East Can Access project that had gone on in the area, and building on all the work of Dave Perkins and the Isle of Thanet Archaeological Society and the Trust for Thanet over many years. But I mean, it was a really interesting project to be involved with, just to sort of actually answer a question. I've got to stop my video. You know, you don't often get to sort of ask or answer questions in the same way that we did with this project. Particularly one which is such a sort of contentious issue, as I think Rich has probably outlined. most archaeological sites you go to, and obviously you have questions about how you're going to undertake the excavations. But in this case, we had a very specific research question that we wanted to try and answer, and it was quite fascinating to do.
Now, I mean, Richard in his discussion with me is sort of correctly very hesitant to give it a full endorsement. Would you share that, or would you say that it definitely answers the question?
I think from the evidence we uncovered, we can't say for definite. I think there are certainly some features there that we'd like to go back and look at again. We'd like to place a trench squarely over the entrance to the site where the trackway was, and we were just too far to the west to actually get the entrance area. And entrance areas, if it is a military installation at any point, they're very diagnostic in terms of the sort of the outline of the post holes, the sort of evidence you might have from that entrance area. There's also a very interesting area to the west of the main entrenchment within a separate enclosure, which had a very high metalworking spike, a magnetic spike, which could be metalworking. And if we're looking for something, a site where you're looking at sort of repairing ships and ironworking, that looks like an enclosure sort of purpose built for that purpose. So it would be great to go and sample that feature and see if it ties in with the right period. I mean, as it is, it's a fantastic site anyway, be it a sort of a middle to late Iron Age site with later Roman occupation on the top of it. And obviously there's a lot of early prehistoric evidence from the area as well. You've got some fantastic Bronze Age sites just on the tip of Weatherleys to the south. So it's a very sort of rich archaeological area. Whether we can say for definite Caesar was there, I don't think we can yet.
Just finally on, there's been quite a lot of sort of mention of Woolmer and a dig that was done at Woolmer, I think in the 60s, maybe even a bit later. Do you think that's worth more exploration, or it's not really kind of shows the same potential as the site we've been talking about?
I mean, obviously the Deal-Woolmer area are sort of suggested as Caesar's first landing point during his first invasion, and that ties in with the evidence and the sort of written account of perhaps a steep-sided beach and the fact that the standard bearer had to sort of jump into deep water. The wide sandy shore, which is the sort of reference to the second invasion, certainly ties in much better with the Pegwell Bay site. But there is the site of Worth as well, and obviously I don't know if Richard covered that, but Worth we looked at briefly as part of the wider project, and I know Keith's on this Zoom as well. And Worth is a very interesting Iron Age site again, and I think that would be worth going back to because that's a very large enclosure around the village of Worth. So there are other sites in the area that I think we could sample, and then of course you've got Bigbury and Homestall Woods, both sites which are within this sort of day's march and could be associated with the wider sort of Caesarean invasion as well. Great.
Well, look, thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry about the issues earlier with people getting in. We have recorded this event, so it will go up on our YouTube channel and also be available on our website. Many thanks to Richard for explaining this and in such detail, and to Andrew at the end for also making some comments. This is obviously a huge and topical issue, and it's great that we've had well, more than 100 people attending tonight, but only 100 managed to get in. So I will be sending the link out to this whole event to everyone on our mailing list so that they can rewatch it at their leisure, and maybe be able to ask further questions of Richard if they think of anything that hasn't been answered during this session. So many thanks. This is for the Kent Archaeological Society, and we hope to be doing more of these events to cover the incredible archaeology and history of our county. And I'm very grateful for everyone taking part tonight. Thanks very much. Take care and be safe. Cheers then. Bye.